Hello, America, and welcome to another episode of the Ultra MK podcast, where together we are reversing the narrative. I am your host, Matt Kennedy, and on today's show, we are being joined by Alix Mayer. She is the board chair and president of FreeNow Foundation, and you're not going to want to miss this show, so get comfortable and get ready for more information.
That is our obligation, to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face.
Hey, Alix, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you back in December, and now we've had the pleasure of seeing each other in two different settings, both that happen to be with Lara Logan when she's had speaking opportunities.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how God works, putting people together sometimes. To be honest with you, I've actually have heard of your nonprofit or the nonprofit that you work with, Free Now Foundation, before. We have mutual friends, and ever since COVID, in 2020, I had read some articles that you guys have published and things that you were doing to fight different legislation in California. So it's just so cool that I finally get a chance to know you and meet people on your team and be there for your fundraiser in Orange County at the dinner and to hear more about what you guys are doing to help preserve the rights of families, of children, students, and to restore sovereignty again to our livelihood and our bodies through fighting some of these different mandates that the state and World Health Organization and other entities have been imposing on our life. So before we dig into some of the work of the Free Now Foundation, I'd really like to understand a little bit more about you and your story and how you came to be in this position to be fighting against different medical tyranny.
Yeah, happy to talk about my origin story. Thanks for asking about that. I think it's important to know where someone like me comes from because I can be labeled an anti-vaxxer. But that's because people don't know that in 1996, I was running a worldwide group for Apple. And I was asked by my family to go on a vacation to Bali. And I thought, oh, I need travel vaccines. And so I went to Palo Alto Medical Foundation to their travel medicine clinic and I rolled up my sleeve and I said, just put everything in there. I don't want to get any of those scary diseases in Southeast Asia. And I didn't know. I didn't know better. 2 weeks later, I collapsed and my legs went out from under me. They felt like noodles. I started weeping, and I'm not normally an emotionally labile person. And I got back from that trip. I thought I had jet lag.
Mm.
And then my jet lag, in quotes, lasted weeks and then months. And then finally it dawned on me, oh, I don't think this is jet lag, a few months out. And I had been physically disabled by these vaccines. And I didn't know it yet. What I did know is that I had 24/7 flu-like symptoms. I had a 24/7 migraine headache and with the nausea, also 24/7 nausea. And I had joint pain, digestive issues suddenly. And I've never fully recovered. I'm totally vaccine injured, but I was in that state acutely for 3 years. But the thing I left out is that about 7 months after those vaccines in May of 1996, I got the brain damage, which I didn't know was coming my way either. And I realized I was brain damaged when I was trying to read the Wall Street Journal. I'm an MBA and I read the Wall Street Journal every day. And I thought there were three bad writers in the Wall Street Journal. And finally, I did research for Apple. So I'm like, ooh, pattern recognition here. The probability that there are three bad writers in the Wall Street Journal is pretty darn low. So I think the problem is me. Now I'm not understanding anything. And my brain, it just wasn't working anymore. I couldn't remember anything a few seconds after it was said to me. If somebody left their phone number on my voicemail before we had visual voicemail people, I don't know if anybody remembers that. But if somebody left their number on my voicemail, I couldn't call someone back unless I was right there writing it down right as they said it. I mean, it was just a horrible period. And so I spent 3 years, 80% housebound because of all those symptoms. I lost my career. My MBA became worthless. And then even after that first 3 years, I still struggled with probably like 30, 40 disabling symptoms. And now I'm down to a handful. So it's good. But that's where I come from. And yes, I'm anti-vaccine for myself, but I'm libertarian for everything else. You can make your own decision about what goes into your body.
Right.
That's not for me to say. I can provide you the information, but you need to make the decision and do your own research.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a really good perspective to have because for far too long, people have been manipulated and brainwashed into thinking that they don't have the authority over their own body and the sovereignty over their own body because they've been, propaganda has been plaguing them and been trying to mass manipulate them. But it's good to have that kind of perspective to share, so people will want to know naturally about how to go about research more and how to better understand the bigger picture of what's been happening to them. So, wow, so that happened to you in 1996. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think like what we had, the internet, right? And we had America Online. Like, how were you able to do some research to really kind of, diagnose what could have happened to you? Like, what were you finding back when you were doing research back in 1996 to be able to come to those conclusions?
That's a really good question because it did take me 13 years to figure out I was actually vaccine injured, and I had a whole bunch of misdiagnoses along the way. Lupus, chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease, those were all misdiagnoses. I appreciate the doctors who gave me those diagnoses because you get a diagnosis and that gives you a path toward treatment and recovery, but those were all incorrect diagnoses for me. And the way I found out about it is I there was some online there was an online world at that time, and it was there, and through a bunch of books that I started figuring out some of the drivers of my symptoms. So for example, when I said there was a shift after 3 years of this, it's because I went gluten free because of my research online. And the neat thing about my background is that I was a French major, so Romance language related to Latin, and medical terms are in Latin, right? And my favorite class in high school is etymology, which is Greek and Latin roots of words. I'm just a total word geek. And then I was doing research for Apple. So not only did I understand the Latin terminology and the studies I was finding on PubMed, I also was able to understand research methodology and what the studies actually meant. And so for me, it was actually really easy to do the research, except that my brain didn't work very well. And so I had, a little bit of time every day where my brain was working a little bit where I could do it. And until I went gluten free in 1999 and had a major shift, but not total recovery, my research was limited. And after that, my brain cleared a lot, and I was able to learn a lot more. And then I started my own blog, and here I am now.
Wow, that's great. No, that's amazing. And it seems just like when getting to know you better, like you've learned a lot about all these different ways that the body can heal and things that Western medicine doesn't really show people or have even in some cases tried to block from people. So that way people can't really heal themselves or heal through things that, God's given us here on earth, and because of whatever agenda they might have, they want to keep us sick or in those state of being controlled, to their apparatus. So, is that, I mean, in this journey that you've been on, is that also what has awakened you to learn so many other things that maybe you wouldn't have learned on your own if nothing would have happened to you back in 96?
Absolutely. That's such a good question because you start out like everybody else and you think the big medical institutions, oh, they're going to know what to do. They're going to know how to diagnose me, and they're going to have a cure, probably in the form of a pill. And everybody thinks that at first. Well, there's a pill that'll cure me. Well, I'm telling you right now, vaccine injury does not have a pill. It doesn't have a pharmaceutical solution. So you are forced out of the medical system when you realize that not only is there not a pill or a combination of pills, but you realize they don't even know what to do with chronic illness. They are clueless. All they want to do is send you to a rheumatologist and give you treatments that'll destroy your immune system,
Mm,
steroids and rituximab, all that kind of stuff. So you're really forced outside of the system. And for me and a lot of other people, especially parents with vaccine injured children, one of the first steps to see if some of those things outside of the traditional medical system are going to work is trying the gluten-free diet. And so that was the thing that really turned me around after 3 years. Again, not fully recovered by any stretch of the imagination, but that was such a huge step out of my health held. My migraine went down to just a headache. The nausea went away. I started sleeping 11 hours a day instead of 16 hours a day. That was a huge shift for me. It allowed me to be much more productive and start working part-time again as a consultant. So that just started me on a journey of like, well, if the gluten-free diet helps that much, what else am I missing? What else is the traditional medical system not telling me? And then you just dive deeper and deeper and deeper after that.
Sure. Wow. Well, it sounds like you were being equipped for something later in the timeline, right? And let's fast forward to, well, the period where my deep awakening had happened, like probably millions upon millions of people on the planet, the year 2020, and when we all were living under lockdowns, mandates, all of this, we saw the world change forever in the year 2020. And so, tell me about what led you into getting into the fight, and then the formation of the nonprofit FreeNow Foundation, and how our viewers can better understand who is FreeNow Foundation and what do they do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say it was about a half a dozen steps because once you realize that all these treatments are hidden from you and the treatments that are available to you through the traditional medical system can be harmful, you start wondering, well, how does that happen? What's behind that? And then you realize, like, oh gosh, pharmaceutical companies might not be ethical. What? I went to business school. I come from like a very famous business family, and we always prided ourselves on being so ethical. And I
Right.
thought, wow, how could my classmates and people who graduated before me from business school who are running these companies, they're not unethical. So it was, and then behind that, I'm like, well, who allows them to do that? And then it's the government. And then you just realize, oh my, wow, this is so much deeper and so much more corrupt than anybody could even imagine. And it's all most of it's about profit, but then, with COVID, we realized it was about way more than profit. It was about population control. It was about probably culling the population, but I'm skipping too far ahead. So that was my first step. And then I was writing in my blog that I mentioned, and I was writing about like, well, this food can reverse MS and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, all I would write about was pharmaceutical corruption. And one of the final articles I wrote was about Roche, who had developed the Tamiflu drug that we stockpiled during the H1N1 pandemic
Sure.
in 2009. And Roche, it turns out they had totally faked their data. When the Cochrane collaboration looked at their data, they realized there were all these anomalies. And then Roche responded to the Cochrane collaboration and said, oh, sorry, the dog ate our homework. We don't know where the raw data is anymore. Sorry, you can't check our work. And I was hooked. And
Wow.
I just could not get away from that. So when I saw Children's Health Defense form and they had Bobby Kennedy at the helm, I thought, oh, that's something different because this vaccine safety movement that I'm just starting to learn about has not been very powerful because there isn't somebody who's well known outside of the vaccine safety movement who's talking with our talking points. But Bobby Kennedy is, and that is a key, really, really big shift in this. So I want to go where he is. And the other smart thing I thought he was doing was the lawsuits because there's nothing more powerful than a judgment in a court. It outlasts legislation, it outlasts executive orders. And I thought, okay, we've got Bobby Kennedy here and lawsuits. That's where I want to be. And so I networked my way through JB Hanley, who was on their board because JB Hanley went to Stanford and we have mutual friends. And so I got on the Children's Health Defense Board with Bobby Kennedy and all those people. And then about a year later, Bobby asked me and two other women from California to start the first chapter, the first California chapter of Children's Health Defense. And we ended up being the most successful chapter, which started to rub rub the national organization wrong. And so we parted ways in early 2023. We rebranded as Free Now Foundation, where I've served as board chair and president for almost 6 years now, if you include the California chapter time.
I see. Interesting. Interesting. So, yeah, I remember just seeing all of the, I call them mama bears, kind of rose up during all of the COVID nonsense because they were coming after children. They were coming after schools, and the school boards and the county boards were colluding together to come after, children in a lot of cases. And so I can see how, the vaccine schedules in California being as crazy as they are. I remember, growing up in the 80s, and I asked my mom, like, Mom, like, did we need this many vaccines when we were going to school, public school? And she's like, no, son, not at all. I think I counted maybe less than 10, like maybe at most, like for your entire school career, graduate, everything. And that's a high number. And so from what I understand now, it's as many as like 70, right? I think I heard you speak recently where there's in California, kids can get as many as 70 vaccines. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's a difference between a vaccine against an illness or an infection. And by the way, people, I don't say the word disease because if you have the flu, you're not diseased. If you get hepatitis A, you're not diseased, okay? It's just an infection. So I say they're vaccines against infections, and there's 17 of those on the children's schedule right now. But you need multiple doses. So there's as many as 90 doses on the California vaccination schedule now. And that used to be the CDC schedule last year, but it no longer is because the CDC dropped six of those vaccines down to a lower level on the schedule. So the highest level is CDC recommended, and that means they come with insurance coverage and they can be mandated. And they dropped those down to a lower level called doctor-patient decision making. And so the federal government came in and decided that those vaccines would still be covered by insurance. But the big difference here, Matt, is you can now sue the vaccine manufacturer for any of those five out of the six vaccines. One of them's COVID vaccine that's protected under the PrEP Act until the end of 2029. But you can sue the vaccine manufacturer if you get injured now by hepatitis A vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, flu vaccine, meningococcal, and rotavirus vaccine. Those five, you can now sue the manufacturer in no matter which state you get vaccinated in. That's your right now because they were moved down from CDC recommended. So they lost that liability protection.
Was that something that your organization took on and directed it, on your own, or is this something that under Bobby Kennedy's administration has done on the federal level?
That was not FreeNow Foundation, but over many years of me working with Bobby, it's
Mhm.
something that we've been working on for a really long time. In 2017 or 2018, I actually launched a project like that to to create what are called vaccine safety guidelines because our government has never done that. They were supposed to do that every 2 years starting in 1986, and they've never done it. About 2018, I started a project with a bunch of thought leaders in the vaccine safety movement to start vaccine safety guidelines. And this is similar to a project that was done in the chronic Lyme disease world, where they got their own treatment guidelines published in a guidelines clearinghouse at the US government level. And that allowed doctors to practice with chronic Lyme disease patients without losing their license. And so our idea was to do the same thing for vaccines with the vaccine safety guidelines to give doctors the discretion and the patients the discretion to decide which vaccines they wanted or didn't want. And so that was in the works. And I educated Bobby about that project many times. I gave him presentations. And then it turned out that finally in 2025 and 2026, they've now moved those vaccines down to that lower level, which is doctor patient decision making. So I can't say I had anything directly to do with it, but I was definitely trying to influence things in that direction for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That it's great that you had that connection. God brings people together. He connected you with RFK, and for you just to share that insight with him because he's such a busy man, and he can't possibly have eyes on everything. But you have been tracking that and was able to show that that's a huge win for humanity. That's a
Yeah,
huge win.
it is.
Um,
I want all the vaccines to move down to doctor patient decision making where they should be. Nothing should be mandated on anyone for any reason whatsoever.
Agreed. I'm going to do this. I would like to just share for just one moment the um, website for the organization FreeNow. Let me go ahead and just do a share screen here real quick. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to read out the About Us portion of the website. FreeNow Foundation is a leading medical freedom law nonprofit in California with cases that aim to end mandates. And while we still have mandates, expand exemptions. In 2026, we will add a case to our portfolio to end hospital homicide. We add causes, I'm sorry, we add cases as funding allows, and rely 100% on donations to make this work happen. We are running a petition urging public officials to pressure Governor Gavin Newsom to make vaccination voluntary again. So please sign and share the petition. Recurring donors, okay, I can see they could opt into a residual donation to help the Legal Warriors Club. And so let me go scroll down here. We will soon launch monthly parental powerhouse parties, PPPs, to help parents to be expectant parents and young parents stand firm in any medical system encounter. The PPPs will help everyone navigate options and exemption within the complex vaccination scheme in California created by SB 277, SB 276, and AB 144. So this is really interesting information. Can you elaborate more on what this term is, ending hospital homicide? What's that?
Yeah. So in the hospitals, when we were locked down, the hospitals pretty much had free reign to experiment on patients because of the PrEP Act. And they were highly incentivized with perverse incentives to diagnose COVID in anyone. In fact, in California, the average hospital received $145,000 from the PrEP Act for every single COVID case that was diagnosed in a hospital setting. So they were highly motivated to do that. And then they got further PrEP Act reimbursements for doing all these experimental treatments on people, remdesivir, which causes kidney failure in 30% of people, ventilation, where only 20% of people ever come off of ventilators. I mean, they were incentivized to kill people in the hospital, and they did. And I believe that this was all done to make COVID seem deadly. Because if you're speaking to a large enough room and you ask everybody to stand up if their loved one died of COVID, a lot of the room will stand up, sadly. And then if you ask a second question, say, now, everybody whose loved one died outside of a hospital, inside of a hospital, sit down. And then 95% of people sit down, meaning that only 5 to 10% of people lost their loved ones to COVID outside of hospital settings. All of a sudden, that just tells the story of what was
It's
going on in the
alarming.
hospitals. They were manufacturing deaths to scare the population with these protocols. And I mean, even there's a guy named Denis Rancourt. He's a doctor, and he did these correlation studies showing that the counties and states with the most heavy-handed lockdown measures and following the protocols to the letter were the ones that had higher death rates in the hospitals. I mean, come on, people, you got to be able to see that. So we have a case because there was a girl in her 20s. She was mentally disabled. She lived in New York. Lovely girl. She was working. She always had a smile on her face. Her name was Danielle. And she went to the hospital, and the hospital staff incorrectly diagnosed her with COVID and lied to the mother about what was going on with her as a pretense to get her admitted to the hospital. And then they experimented on her so much with so many different protocols and tranquilizers, ventilation, everything I just named, that she became unrecognizably swollen. It was just awful. I mean, she had bruises on her face, her lips, and her face. She just didn't even look like the same person. And it took them about 40 days to kill her. And it's disgusting. It should never happen. And her poor mother is still grieving to this day. And that happened back in 2021. And we're going to get justice for her, and we're going to prevent that from happening to other people.
That's awesome. No, I'm so glad. I can tell something was wrong the way that, the media was trying to create all that fear around the death counts. And then I remembered doing some just simple math on like the cases and the death counts in like my own county. And it was something like, 0.0018 was the odds of somebody dying from COVID, in the first wave of the scare. And I'm like, and then I had to look up what are the odds of dying in a car crash? And it was a lot greater. And I was like, why are they pushing so much fear when if you do some simple math, it's not adding up to being this fearful. Like it's not, and to have people locked down and have businesses locked down and to be controlling people the way they're trying to control people. I knew that something nefarious was going on. And then learning about the treatments that they were rolling out, like the remdesivir and the ventilators, I was starting to see, and other podcasters were interviewing guests, like Dr. Judy Mikovits and who had worked with Fauci years past during the AIDS pandemic, and it was all being shown to us that they already had this planned out where they were going to use this drug to administer to patients in the hospital, and that drives up the death count. So that was interesting and eye-opening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was part of the plan. I have another presentation I give called the 7 levels of COVID fraud. And it starts with the fact that the virus was never isolated and purified. And then when the Chinese researchers called Fan Wu et al. Released the sequence for SARS-CoV-2 in their paper in January 2020, yeah, January 2020, they destroyed the sample so their research couldn't be peer reviewed. Sounds just
Wow.
like Roche and their Tamiflu thing, right?
It does sound
So
like that.
yeah, so it starts there, and then, all those pieces of fraud just build on each other.
Right. And the way that the mainstream media was running cover for information, the way that censorship was rolled out through social media platforms, and then the mainstream media was, making anybody out who was going to use anything like hydroxychloroquine out to be crazy kook conspiracy theorists, or ivermectin. They came after Joe Rogan heavily and didn't want anybody to look at a tried and true therapeutic that had been around since like the 1950s and was only cost pennies on the dollar, to help people. And they didn't want anybody looking at that. In fact, I saw that somewhere in the US, I think it might have been Pennsylvania, there was a facility that was producing, um, uh, it's either, it was one of those drugs.
Oh
They were
yeah,
producing
hydroxychloroquine. I think I know what you mean by.
hydroxychloroquine, and then
Yeah,
it bursts into flames and burns
yeah.
down, and now
Just
now you can't even
wouldn't you
get it.
know?
Yeah, imagine that, right? Imagine that now you can't even get your hands on it, and so it's just interesting how it was a choreographed event from my perspective, and how pharma worked with the medical establishment, which worked with big tech and mainstream media all together. Kind of sounds like something I learned about called Event 201 that happened just years before the COVID pandemic. So, where they
Yeah,
kind of like created a mock situation of a global pandemic, right? And they all kind of pretended that what was going to be happening in years to come.
right. I know, Matt. So they told us what they were going to do, and then they did it.
And then they did it.
Come on.
Yeah, it's
I
right
mean,
in our
it's
faces.
like medical terrorism. I mean, we think we live in a first world country. We live in a third world country. People are blowing up hydroxychloroquine factories so people can't get it. And
Right.
that's and
Right.
that's a banana republic.
It totally is. And speaking of Banana Republic, it almost feels like that sometimes in California
Mhm.
because of the type of legislation and our governor and all of the people in Sacramento and what they've been trying to impose on us. I'd like to switch gears now to kind of bring my audience up to speed, because a lot of people, I mean, it's crazy to say it, but like COVID began almost 5 years ago now. And we've all kind of, a lot of people think, well, the world went back to normal, although people like you have been following it closely to where it's not been normal. But a lot of people think it's normal because they're back at work. But can we go back in time a little bit to talk about some of these Senate bills that were passed and signed by Gavin Newsom, and Assembly bills like 2021? I was reading on your website, Newsom signed Senate Bill 276, the medical exemption system. What's that one about?
Yeah, so let me start with what they started to do to slowly take away vaccination rights from parents in California. So the first in I think 2010 or 2011, there's a bill called AB 499, and that one made it possible so that children could choose any treatment or intervention they wanted to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. So that put in the hands of 12-year-olds at that time the decision to whether or not they wanted hepatitis B vaccine or HPV vaccine. That became their decision, 12 and up. Meanwhile, that same year, Governor Brown signed into law another bill that said if you're under 18, you don't know if you're going to get burned in a tanning bed. So if you're under 18, you can't go in a tanning bed. But as young as 12, you can decide on HPV vaccine and hepatitis B vaccine, two of the most dangerous vaccines on the schedule at the time, I should say. So now, fast forward about 4 years, because every 4 years, California does something horrible to parental rights around vaccination. So 4 years to 2015. Then there's a new bill, SB 277. It removed the personal belief exemption from vaccination. And so that also removed our religious rights because that fell under personal belief exemptions. So that left the other side of it, which is medical exemptions. And Senator Pan, who's a lying sack of you know what, told told his colleagues in the Senate and all the public, oh, we're going to make sure that the medical exemption is very robust. We're not going to touch that. Well, boom, 4 years later, 2019, another bill's introduced, pans the author, destroys the medical exemption by setting up this anti-vaxxer database system that they call CAIR-ME, CAIR-ME. It stands for California Immunization Registry-Medical Exemption. And so what happens with that database is that if you can find a California-based doctor, that's part of the law. You can't have a doctor out of state now, thanks to Senator Pan. Find a California-based doctor to write you a medical exemption under penalty of perjury for the doctor. And if they're convicted of that, that's a six months of jail time. So if you find somebody who wants to do that and risk their medical license and risk their freedom, then that goes in the CARE-ME database, and that pops up to the Department of Public Health in California. Then a public health officer, medical doctor who's never examined your child, it denies every single medical exemption in the entire system. And so we're doing PRA requests right now to see if any medical exemptions at all have made it through that process. And then what happens after that is the school logs into the database and they say, oh, I'm sorry, but your student's medical exemption was not approved by the Department of Public Health. Your student can't go here. And Matt, some schools take it even further. There's a school in Ventura County now who's barring entry to a student who can absolutely not be vaccinated any further because the student's already vaccine injured. And they've accused the parents of truancy, which also carries jail time if convicted. I mean, it's moronic. It's a catch-22.
Yeah.
And the system here is so broken because of all these laws. And then Newsom went and made it worse by signing another bill into law just last year, in September of 2025. It's called AB 144. So in response to the federal government's ratcheting down slowly of the vaccine schedule, Newsom decided that in California, our vaccine schedule is going to be pinned to the January 2025 CDC recommended schedule with 17 vaccines and 90 doses, including COVID shots. And that's not all. In California, it creates an incredibly confusing scenario because for school attendance in California, children are required to get more than 30 doses of 10 vaccines, so a subset of the California schedule. And nobody tells you the difference. I don't think a single parent in California knows the difference between those schedules because if you go to the pediatrician, they will never help you differentiate to the ones that children need for school attendance and the fuller schedule that's pinned to the CDC 2025 schedule. So all the pediatricians are going to be coercing and pressuring parents to give their children 90 doses of 17 vaccines, even though only 10 are required for school in California. It's an incredibly confusing situation for California parents, and it shouldn't be that way at all.
Is that just because there's misunderstanding from the pediatrician's point of view? They're not understanding it fully, or is there some corruption that's brewing there because they get paid to administer all of those vaccines?
There are some perverse incentive schedules, of course, for the pediatricians. Some have been leaked from Anthem, Blue Cross, Blue Shield. And one that's been out for a long time as a leaked document is they will get paid $400 per pediatric patient as long as a certain percentage, very high percentage, like 90, 98% of their 2-year-olds are fully vaccinated according to the CDC recommended schedule. So they're highly incentivized to do that. Let's say the average group pediatric practice has 1,000 toddlers in it, then 1,000 times $400 is 400,000 extra dollars to the pediatrician. But beyond that, the basically well baby visits are mostly vaccination opportunities for the pediatrician. And those kids who are getting vaccinated actually visit the pediatrician for fever 25 times more than the unvaccinated kids in the same pediatric practices. 25 times more for fever, which is ironic because vaccines are supposed to prevent infection and prevent fever, but they're there more. So the pediatricians, again, making more money on the vaccinated kids who come back with their fevers and ear infections and all the other autoimmune, allergic, and eczema and asthma sequelae from the vaccination. So I know one pediatrician in the Bay Area, Dr. Richard Fox. He's on our board, and he's also an attorney who's the one behind our due process lawsuit to end mandates. He's a vaccine optional pediatrician. And guess what? People come to him once and they never see him again because their kids never get sick. They don't get vaccines, so they're never back. So if we take him as an example of what pediatricians would make if vaccinations weren't on this required schedule,
Right.
Pediatricians, we wouldn't have a need for pediatricians. They'd be
Right.
completely out of business.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing just to kind of boil it down to like, I mean, I'm a believer and I believe that God created our bodies with all of the things that we need to survive on this earth. So why has it only been in the last 25 to 30 years that all of a sudden human children need all this extra help, right? That they want to say it as, and children 100 years ago. I mean, I just don't believe the data as much anymore because it just seems like it's been skewed so much for us to not, you know, to want to, be scared and fall for their tricks. At least most parents would. So I think that's really good that you guys are giving people resources through the FreeNow Foundation, like we just read about in the About Us portion of the website, where you guys are able to equip new parents with all of their rights and understanding what their rights are and what, children are going to be exposed to, and especially in the California school system and medical system.
Yeah, it's going to be about how to say no in every medical encounter without triggering a call to CPS because they use that as a battering ram. If you don't want vaccines, especially in the hospital, then they do threaten CPS. And it's absolutely awful. It's a terrible situation for parents to be in. Our children in California are still under the same medical tyranny that everyone was in the country under COVID and lockdowns. And
Yeah.
it cannot go on like that. We've got to stop it.
Another assembly bill that was signed, AB 144, California only vaccine schedule, removes public transparency, bypasses input from parents and physicians. So what's that one about?
Yeah, so AB 144, that's the one that pegged California's vaccination schedule to the January 2025 CDC schedule. But it cuts out all public participation in what should be on the schedule or not. So this is literally vaccination without representation because there's no public comment, there's no public interface to this whole process at all. And it's the public health department that decides what the schedule is. And then it's the public health department that enforces the schedule. It's a public health department vaccine dictatorship here because of AB 144. The other thing AB 144 did is that they absolved everybody in the vaccine chain, except the manufacturer, of liability for any kind of misinformation and omission. Omission is a word used in this law, and so that destroys informed consent. If you can't get sued in the event of omission of not telling people about material side effects of vaccination, then there's no informed consent in California at all. It's
Right.
useless. It doesn't matter. So
Right.
that law is just, it's one of the worst laws I've ever seen. Although as the other the other vaccination laws are up there as well. It's a crime what they're doing to parents and children in California. And
Yeah.
and children are suffering in California. We have the highest rate of autism in California. There's two boys with autism in every classroom in California. There's one California couple per day who finds a baby dead in the crib from SIDS. This is because of the vaccination schedule. All those things happen in close proximity to vaccination. 80% of SIDS deaths happen within a few days of vaccination. Half of
Hmm.
autism cases happen within a week of vaccination. That is not an accident. And every vaccinated versus unvaccinated study where you have a truly unvaccinated group shows that the odds of having these neurological disorders, of the infant mortality, of the learning disabilities, of the autoimmunity, the asthma, the allergies, the eczema, all of that is so much higher, relative risk of at least 4 times for any of those things. One of the studies showed your risk of allergies was 30 times greater if you were vaccinated than unvaccinated. It's a crime, and our federal government refuses to do those studies. And when there's a good, strong study that comes out, like from the Henry Ford Institute, which is called the Inconvenience Study, I'm trying to remember the author's name right now, but he did that study with perfect methodology, and it showed the exact same thing as all the other studies done by independent researchers. And now the Henry Ford Institute is trying to say, oh, it doesn't have great methodology. Well, how did that happen? They don't do any studies with bad methodology. And this researcher was, the cream of the crop researcher, and now they're saying they won't publish the study. It shows the same thing. There's a dozen vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies that all say the same thing. And here in California, parents do not have a choice. They're being forced into what I would call child abuse and bodily harm of their children by being forced to have vaccines in their children that everybody knows cause harm, but they're too chicken shit to admit it, and they're holding the bag. Nobody can pay for the damage that's been done. Nobody. That we don't have enough money in this country to pay for it. Even printing money, we don't have enough money to pay for the damage that's been done. I mean, just me as a vaccine injured adult in 30 years, I've spent an average of $50,000 a year out of pocket to get the recovery you see right now. And that adds up to about $1.5 million out of pocket. And the average kid with autism will cost about $1.5 million for just the basic treatments for their entire life. It's
Wow.
sick. That expense should never be pushed on someone who didn't want something or who is not fully informed of the side effects.
And is that ratio? I heard was it 1 in 12 children now in California have autism?
Yes, 1 in 12 and a half boys in California have
Boys.
autism compared to the national average. I think it's 1 in 30. But you can see, like the cases of autism, you can see they've been climbing since 2015,
Yeah.
since we lost the personal belief exemption. And the number of IEP students is exploding in California since 2015. Also, we've added, I think, 160,000 more IEP students to our rosters. We have more than 800,000 IEP students. That's individualized education plan. It's also called special ed, and you get federal funding for that. So California gets $14 billion in federal funding for the IEP students. They don't want to give that up. I mean,
No.
everything's a gravy train. I mean, it's worse than
Yeah.
Minnesota.
It is. No, it is. And it's the uniparty. I say the uniparty because this isn't red and blue, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative. It's not, because when it boils down to it, when you start doing the research and going down the rabbit holes, you start to see that it was both like Republicans and Democrats in political power who've sold our rights away to big pharma and to these vaccine manufacturers, because the whole immunity from any kind of lawsuits or prosecution towards the vaccine manufacturers, that all came to be under the President Reagan's administration, right? And people, at least on the right, that thought, oh man, Ronald Reagan's just this great guy and he did so much for our country, and we never been so free. But then he allows for those kinds of things to have happened. And then that leads me to another rabbit hole of the Bohemian Grove, which is like a place where the secret societies gather, and these men of power and political influence come together, and they do their backdoor deals. Because I've seen photos where Ronald Reagan is there at the Bohemian Grove, and it shattered my worldview of what I grew up. My dad always talking about how great Ronald Reagan was, but then I was like, but Dad, why did you do that? Because now all these people are getting injured with vaccines, and he's the one that protected the vaccine companies. So, and
Right.
that's really what I hope to portray on this show for any of my viewers, is like, you have to think bigger than just political ideology and whatever political party that maybe you grew up identifying with or your family had been voting for, because a lot of them are working together, and it's basically the globalist uniparty people participating together versus true patriots, true America first, people who want to do the right thing, good people. And that those are the people that we're trying to identify, to bring together so they can put any political partisanship to the side. That's why I thought seeing RFK, Bobby Kennedy, join forces with President Trump, it brought a total new group of people to work together that maybe before, in years past, because of the propaganda of division, of separating people on social issues that would never normally come together, were able to come together because of all the things that have happened to us, from medical tyranny to big tech censorship to selling all of our land and farms and everything to foreign adversaries, to find a way to kind of bond us together. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing.
I couldn't agree more. It is very bonding, and I've locked arms with so many people that I might not have locked arms with before. I mean, it led me to church and to get baptized, for example. And I feel like my community, my family of medical freedom people is one of the most incredible found families I've ever had. And it's large.
Yeah.
We are legion.
You guys are. You guys have deep ranks, and you guys have a lot of great people. The Maha people have just been awesome. In fact, like the whole, Bobby Kennedy and Maha, and the whole power play of President Trump and Bobby Kennedy coming together, for me, it helped like some people in my own personal family kind of finally wake up and be like, oh, okay, like we shouldn't be fearful of the MAGA, the MAGA patriots. Like they want to work together in some realm or another because we're fighting a common enemy. And these are people that have a depopulation agenda, or they have profit over people mindset. And these are people that are not helping we the people, the American people, or people in other nations that are under the similar um, rule and tyranny, like we're seeing in the UK and we're seeing in Israel and other places where, I mean, they had high vaccination rates and forced into camps in Australia. That was
Right.
wild.
Yeah, Matt, let me just tell you something, this contrast that just, I'm gobsmacked by this. So in the UK, they've introduced the digital ID, and that's for right to work and right to rent. Because in the UK, you can't even rent a place unless you prove that you're a citizen or legally in the country, right? And so everybody in the UK has caught on to that. They've been protesting in the streets. It's called the Brit card, by the way. They're protesting in the streets. There's a citizen who filed a petition with Parliament, and it got 3 million signatures in 6 months before like the petition automatically closed. And then, Matt, now let's contrast that with people in the United States. We're already on a digital ID. It's called the Real ID.
Yeah,
And there are pictures of people lining up around our DMVs to go get it. And they have no idea what they're doing. That thing's going to be digitized, sorry,
yep,
in like a year or two. And it's going to be exactly what the Brit card is that everybody's protesting against in the UK. But everybody here is lining up to get it. And it's just
right,
mind-boggling. And what people don't realize is when they walk into the DMV, that's not the DMV anymore. You're doing a deal with the Department of Homeland Security. What you've done is you've taken your state identification and your state photo and you've federalized that. You've federalized your biometrics, 35 points from ear to ear. You federalized your verified identity and your address and everything. And now that can go in the federal DHS database that Palantir is scooping up and combining with all the other federal databases now. If you hadn't done that, then all of that data would not be federalized. That'd be state data, and it would be illegal to combine it with all the other federal data. But when you got the Real ID, you federalized everything and you verified everything.
right.
And let me say one other thing about this biometric scan of your face. It's 35 points from ear to ear, as I said. That makes you part of the Internet of Bodies. You are the part of the Internet of Bodies. That's different than a fingerprint, which, can't be caught on a camera. If your face is scanned, you're part of the Internet of Bodies. And unfortunately, our faces have all been scanned. I'm sure that my our faces on Zoom are scanned and in databases, but you want to limit the amount of data the government gets. I think it's data rape. It's
It is.
information rape, and you've got to stop at every point you can. And anything that's still voluntary, you got to say no. So go take your Real ID back.
Well, you're right, 100%. And I really feel that if if this administration is really working on behalf of we the people, that we would also start to consider a digital bill of rights. Like we need to have some protections in the digital space because right now they're 100 steps ahead of us with all the data gathering. And I'm still learning about from other specialists who really have analyzed what was in the COVID shots, because it isn't, they always roll these things out with different multi-purpose reasons. So yeah, it could have been something that maybe had spike proteins and gave people COVID. Yeah, in theory. But there's also the mRNA messenger technology, and there's nanoparticle, different nanoparticles and graphene oxide. These are all things that are used in the digital surveillance and that whole space of being able to track, our human anatomy and physiology. So it's really
Absolutely.
alarming when you start to really kind of really look at this bigger picture of what's happening, both in the medical side and then our just overall well-being of who we are as sovereign people, God's people. So. This is interesting. I'd like to shift gears again real quick over to Gavin Newsom because we just had a gathering at the I'm sorry, yeah, World Economic Forum, the WEF over in Davos, Switzerland, and we were able to witness President Trump basically delivering his statements of what his plans are with the America First policies and how our relationship is going to be changing with the World Economic Forum and all the globalists. But like Gavin Newsom always is doing, he's doing the opposite of what the Trump administration and Bobby Kennedy want to do with our medical rights. And they've in California opted back into the WHO, the World Health Organization. So I know that you had sent me an article about that. I'd like to share that. And before that, I just really want to show this clip real quick that I was able to find. We'll go and share this with our audience. This is something I found out of a Bay Area news network, and it's about a 2-minute video. So bear with me 1 second.
California is once again breaking ranks with the Trump administration, this time over the World Health Organization. Today, Governor Gavin Newsom's office announced California has become the first and so far only state to join the WHO's Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network. It comes one day after the Trump administration announced the U.S. has officially withdrawn from the WHO. NBC Bay Area's Emma Goss has more.
Governor Newsom took the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, taking aim at President Trump.
It's America in reverse.
And offstage, meeting with the WHO's Director General to discuss California's recent partnership in responding to global health threats. In September, California became the first state to join GORN, the WHO's Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network.
And we now are able to be on weekly calls with other countries in the World Health Organization to hear about what's happening as far as any emerging public health issues or emerging threats. And we also get a weekly report from them as well, just with various situational awareness.
Only sovereign nations can be official dues-paying members of the WHO. There are no dues to being a part of GORN.
I think other states can opt into it, and others I think are exploring this as well.
Governor Newsom called the U.S. exiting the WHO reckless and warned it could be harmful to public health. With GORN, California doctors will have global access to early warning systems and data sharing to prepare for potential virus outbreaks.
Being part of the network in the WHO, having the West Coast Health Alliance, being part of the Governors Public Health Alliance with 14 other governors, and all of the other cooperation that's happening, it's preserving and kind of insulating our public health as much as possible during these times of turbulence.
Turbulence, especially around vaccines. Friday, the federal chair of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Vaccines floated the idea that polio and measles vaccines should be optional, a position that worries infectious disease specialists.
What we're worried about is that there's going to be more suffering in Californians, more suffering in Americans, because we are going to see the re-emergence of a lot of diseases that we, vanquished.
Emma Goss, NBC Bay Area News.
Wow, Matt, that's a good clip. I like that.
Yeah, so you were asking me like what's the mainstream news doing? It's just more fear, right? It's like look at, this is President Trump's move to exit the the World Health Organization, making the announcements at the WEF. So that's their response. The mainstream news just wants to create more fear, trying to get people, in their viewership to be afraid of certain diseases that they think they're going to have, because making vaccines are going to be optional instead of mandatory. And what Gavin Newsom is doing is the right way to go. So it's all narrative control for them.
It's complete narrative control. First, I want to make a comment on one of the points in the video, and they said public health experts are worried about polio if the polio vaccine becomes optional. Hello, they don't even know what they're talking about. The current polio vaccine that's been given since the year 2000 in the United States is the injected polio vaccine. That does not prevent person-to-person spread. So it doesn't matter whether or not we have polio vaccine. The polio vaccine was designed to protect somebody's own nervous system from polio, but it could still, if somebody has the polio enterovirus, it's a stomach virus, it can still spread through the poop or saliva to other people. So if the polio vaccine, the injected one, goes away, it makes no difference for herd immunity or public health at all. And so that is completely disingenuous and worse for public health people to say that if the polio vaccine became optional, that there'd be polio outbreaks is simply not true. But I do want to talk about this new GORN, GOARN membership. That's Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, and that is an alliance within the WHO that California has now joined. We don't have to pay to join GORN, which I call groan. That's a good mnemonic device to remember it because it's a big
Right.
groaner. Um, the problem with that is that there's this exchange with the WHO, and they're going to be monitoring and testing and confirming outbreaks and sending us supplies. But the most concerning part of it is they'll send their experts. And if we thought it was bad enough that unelected public health officials were running and ruining our counties when we were locked down, imagine what happens when experts, so-called experts from the WHO, come to California to enforce mandates, to enforce lockdowns again, to tell you you can't leave your home, to force people to go to the hospital, to enforce contact tracing. That's what they could do in the next outbreak. And so you never want to hear the six scariest words, which are a public health emergency of international concern. That will trigger WHO quote unquote experts potentially coming to California to contain the outbreak. And it's going to be exactly like lockdowns for COVID, and it'll be lockdowns 2.0. That's what everybody's nervous about. And by the way, we don't pay to be in Gorn, but we have to pay for the experts and pay for them to get here and stay here and do their work. So again, this is public health without any representation from our government. Public health officials are not elected, and now we might have international public health officials come to California at some point, and taxpayer money would go to pay for these people that we don't even want here, we didn't elect.
You know what? I'm so glad too when the Trump administration now is publicly saying that they're going to be moving into California to uncover all of the taxpayer fraud, because I can imagine that all of the fraud that they're going to find allegedly was probably a lot of it was from some of the COVID shenanigans that they were spending money on, and all the money that went towards, funding illegal migration, funding the homelessness that really wasn't going to homelessness, all of just the way that they've been spending our taxpayer dollars. They always try to implement policies the American public or the California public didn't really vote for or understand, and they use our own taxpayer dollars to fund it, which is in itself fraud.
It is.
So I just want to share with our viewership where people can read more about the situation of Gavin Newsom pulling California back into the World Health Organization. I'm going to share screen. So for people who want to look this article up, you can find it on the FreeNowFoundation.org website, and it's under, I believe, articles, or is it
It's
under, do it translate?
it's
And
under
then
articles.
under articles, yep. And it's
Yeah.
California's Sneaky Who Alliance. Newsom imports authoritarianism by Alix Mayer. And you can read more about what he is up to here in the articles down below. Is there anything else you think is important for us to take from this article?
I just think that this is a big problem, and we are looking for legal angles to get rid of California's participation in Gorn.
Hmm.
But the really scary thing is that I don't think it's just going to be California. I think that the West Coast Health Alliance is going to join next. And then there's also an East Coast Health Alliance that can join. And there's even a Governor's Health Alliance. And, you used a term at the beginning of the show, Matt, before we started recording, and you said this is a medical secession from the federal government. And I didn't vote for this. You didn't vote for this. I don't want to medically secede from the federal government right now. But California is doing it. And, of the probably 17, 18 states that are part of one of these so-called health alliances, they are doing a medical secession that nobody voted for. So I think it's a really big problem. And I think that this could be a really huge disaster if there's a public health emergency of international concern declared by the WHO. And then, the 17, 18 states of the United States could be, I'm going to say, invaded by unelected public health experts from the WHO to control us, to contact trace us, to make sure that we stay under quarantine and make sure that vaccinations are enforced. I mean, that's the worst case scenario, but I don't see why we shouldn't be thinking of what the worst case scenario is. That's what you have to do every time you make a law, sign a treaty, or if a judge is deciding on a lawsuit, you have to think of the worst case scenario of how the decision and the law could be used. And this is the worst case scenario. And it already happened. Why couldn't it happen again?
Well, yeah, because we already lived through a scenario where they subverted the U.S. Constitution in and put in place their own medical policies that overrode our own Constitution. And I thought, the Constitution is supposed to be the law of the land, but they put in different people within state hierarchical power to make judgment calls on whether or not, they were going to implement all these policies, and they completely disregarded the rights of the people, the Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution. So we've already lived through it. So what's going to stop them from trying to do that again? Because they saw that it worked so well in so many different states. So it's really, really good points that you make.
Yeah. Well, one other really scary point is that the WHO has a program called One Health, and it equates human health with animal health with climate health. So, what if they could declare a public health emergency of international concern over climate change? And then their experts come here to enforce mandates and enforce geofencing, enforce carbon usage. Like, oh, you drove too far from your house. I'm sorry, you've got to turn around and go home, or worse. I mean,
Right.
it's not going to be pretty.
No, it's not. It's not, and it's been used to be weaponized upon the people of America already. But they will amplify their tactics moving forward because they're always trying to implement all this new technology, all the tracking, the facial recognition, whether you can go to the store and buy food or not, and a digital ID and the digital credit score or the social credit score system. They've already talked about it openly in other public settings and public forums. So that is their pattern. They always tell us what they want to do to us, and then they roll it out a few years later. So, this has been an amazing interview with you, Alix, and you've given us so much information to digest, be aware of, but also call to action about, how people should take this really seriously and how they should get involved. Where can we send folks to find you and learn more about what you're doing and your organization, the FreeNow Foundation?
Thanks, Matt. It's been a real pleasure to get to have this conversation with you, someone who's so informed about these issues and guides the conversation and adds to it so beautifully. So thank you for having me. If you want to find me and my work, go to freenowfoundation.org. We're also on Instagram at FreeNowUSA and on X at FreeNowUSA. I also have a Substack, alexmeyer.substack.com. And those are most of the ways you can find us and me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I encourage everybody to take some time to go and check out Alix Mayer and the website, the freenowfoundation.org website. Learn more about what they're doing. They can use all the help that they can get. She's right. In California, that's really where they roll out a lot of these tyrannical policies. They experiment on us out in California to see how much they can get away with, and then they roll it out to the rest of the country. So if you're watching this in Alabama, if you're watching this in Nebraska, Texas, Florida, Oregon, it's just a matter of time until they try to do it to you and your people in your state and your family. So get ahead of this stuff. Support us out in California with the things that we're trying to do to help all of America. And please help support Alix Mayer and her organization if you can. Alix, I hope that you can come back on my show in the future, update us with more information if that's all right.
Absolutely. I just hope I don't come on with more bad news.
No, no, you don't. You don't. You always bring us some joy and light when you can. I know you would.
Yeah, my motto is doom with a smile.
Doom with a smile. I
Because you
could use
got to
that one.
have
That's a
joy.
good one. We have to keep smiling. We have to keep joking and laughing where we can, we have to keep praying because that God has a bigger plan than all the globalists, right? And we may not understand his plan, but we have the faith in knowing that there is a plan and he's on our side. He's not on the side of evil and darkness. That's their time is limited, and that's why they're being so extreme because they know that their time is almost up.
That's
So,
right. And we have the numbers and we have the power if we can have enough numbers who are willing to do something about it. You can't stay closeted in your beliefs. You've got to be out there. And the more of us speaking up and taking actions, the more power we have. And that's the only power we have. So speak up and take action.
well, you heard it. You heard it from Alix. Thank you so much, Alix, for joining us on the Ultra MK podcast, where together we are reversing the narrative. Have a blessed day.